In the Arizona territory, a woman's worth wasn't measured in gold or cattle. It was measured in obedience. And for Eliza Jane Abernathy, obedience was a price she just couldn't pay. Her crime wasn't robbing a stagecoach or rustling a steer. Her crime was wearing a pair of denim trousers. For that, they put her on an auction block, a stage of shame for every grimy prospector and dirt cake settler in Redemption Gulch to gawk at. And as the auctioneer prepared to sell her life away, 1 year at a time, a voice cut through the crowd. It was a voice as cold and sharp as a shard of obsidian. He was a man who looked like he'd been carved from the canyons themselves. A rich Apache warrior, feared and respected in equal measure. And what he said next would light a fire that was going to burn this whole rotten town to the ground. The sun over Redemption Gulch was a cruel, angry god. It beat down on the parched earth with a hammer fist, cracking the dirt like old leather. For Eliza Jane Abernathy, the heat was just one more layer of the hell she was living in. It clung to her skin, baked the worn denim of her trousers until they felt stiff as a coffin lid. It was these trousers that had sealed her fate, a man's garment, practical, durable, and in this town, an act of war. She stood on the crude wooden porch of the Dust Devil Saloon, her chin held high, but a tremor was running through her legs that she couldn't stop. Before her, a crowd of maybe 100 souls had gathered for the show. Prospectors with sun-scorched faces. Tired-looking women in their bonnets, their eyes a mix of pity and contempt. And aimless drifters who smelled of cheap whiskey and desperation. The man at her side, the architect of this whole nightmare, was Jedediah Thorne. He was a fat man, a man whose fine waistcoat was always stained with sweat and gravy. His small piggy eyes gleamed with a special kind of malice. "Behold, gentlemen," Thorne's voice boomed, a theatrical roar that bounced off the dusty storefronts. "A cautionary tale, a woman who forgets her station, a woman who presumes to wear the attire of a man, work like a man, and speak her mind like a man." A few jeers and some nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Eliza flinched, but she didn't lower her gaze. She locked her eyes on the shimmering outline of the Dragoon Mountains in the distance, the same mountains she and her younger brother, Thomas, had crossed to get to this godforsaken place. They'd arrived with a lame mule and a desperate hope. A hope of finding work, any work, so she could afford the doctor for Thomas's racking cough. A cough that sounded wetter and deeper with every passing week. And work she had found. Mucking out Thorne's stables, hauling barrels of ale, back-breaking labor that was impossible in the long, cumbersome skirts society demanded. Skirts snagged on splinters, tripped her on the uneven ground, and soaked up mud and filth. So she'd made a choice. She traded the last of her mother's silver lockets for a pair of worn denim trousers from a traveling tailor. They were freedom. They were practical. And in Redemption Gulch, they were a sin. Thorne had warned her. "Decent folk don't take kindly to abominations, girl," he'd sneered, his breath sour. "You'll wear a dress, or you'll find yourself without a roof over your head, or medicine for that sickly whelp of a brother." Eliza had refused. The $5 a week Thorne paid her barely covered the rent on their miserable shack, and the watered-down laudanum the town doctor, a man named Alistair Finch, prescribed for Thomas. She couldn't afford a dress, and she wouldn't have worn one for this work anyway. Her defiance had festered in Thorne's gut. The final straw came that morning. She'd calmly corrected his math in front of a traveling merchant, saving the man $1 and costing Thorne a dishonest profit. His rage had been volcanic. "You owe me, girl," he had seethed, his fingers digging into her arm. $50 for your brother's medicine, which I so graciously covered. 20 for your board. You'll work it off. But first, this town will have a lesson in propriety." So here she was, not being sold into slavery, even Thorne wasn't that brazen, but into indentured servitude. Her labor, her time, her very presence, auctioned off to the highest bidder to cover a debt he'd inflated to an impossible sum. The public shaming was just his personal touch. "What am I bid for 1 year's service of this trouser Jezebel?" Thorne bellowed. "She's strong, I'll give her that. Strong-willed too. Perhaps one of you fine gentlemen can break her of these unladylike notions." The men shifted. Some looked away, a flicker of shame in their eyes. Others grinned with a predatory hunger. A grubby miner named Peterson, known for his foul temper and even fouler smell, raised a hand. "I'll bid $10. Could use someone to shovel out my sluice box." "15!" shouted a blacksmith's assistant from the back, a man with arms like tree trunks. A cold dread washed over Eliza. She was being traded like livestock. Her gaze swept the crowd, searching, begging for a single spark of compassion. She found none. They were vultures, all of them. And then she saw him. He was standing near the back by the watering trough. Apart from the rest, he hadn't been there a moment before. Or maybe he had, and he was just the kind of man who could choose when he wanted to be seen. He was tall and broad-shouldered, radiating a stillness that was more intimidating than any loud threat. He wasn't a white man. His skin was the color of rich copper. His straight, jet-black hair was tied back with a simple leather cord. His high cheekbones and aquiline nose spoke of the Apache people, the people who called these lands home long before towns like Redemption Gulch scarred the landscape. But he was dressed unlike any native she had ever seen. He wore tailored black trousers, not buckskin, and a clean, collarless white shirt under a fine leather vest. Polished boots were on his feet. There was an unmistakable air of wealth about him, but it was a quiet, absolute confidence, not the flashy gold watch chain Thorne sported. His eyes, dark and piercing, weren't on Thorne. They were fixed directly on her. She saw no pity in them, no lust. She saw something else, something she couldn't name, a focused, intelligent assessment. $20, Peterson yelled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. Thorne's grin widened. $20 from Mr. Peterson. A fine price for a year of hard labor. Going once? Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Peterson's claim was a hovel on the edge of a canyon. His cruelty to his mules was legendary. A year with him would be a death sentence one way or another. Going twice, she closed her eyes, bracing herself for the final fall of the invisible gavel. $1,000. The voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a resonant clarity that cut through the crowd's noise like a razor. It had come from the man by the trough. A collective gasp went through the onlookers. Heads whipped around to stare at him. Even Jedediah Thorne was stunned into silence, his mouth hanging agape. The Apache warrior pushed himself off the post he was leaning against and began to walk forward. The crowd parted for him as if he were a phantom, a silent, powerful wave of intimidation preceding him. He stopped 10 feet from the porch, his dark eyes never leaving Eliza's. Thorne finally found his voice, sputtering. 1,000? That's an absurd sum. For what? Her debt is only $70. The warrior's gaze flickered to Thorne, and for the first time Eliza saw the cold fire in his eyes. It was an ancient, dangerous fire. "I am not paying her debt," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "I am buying the contract. I am buying her indenture. And I am paying a price so high that no man in this town will ever again think a woman's freedom is a cheap commodity to be traded for the crime of wearing sensible clothes." He reached into a leather satchel at his hip and produced a small, heavy pouch. He tossed it onto the porch. It landed with a solid, definitive thud of gold coins. Thorne stared at it as if it were a coiled serpent. Peterson the miner scoffed, emboldened by disbelief. "What's a savage like you want with a white woman anyway? You ain't even got the right—" The warrior's head snapped toward Peterson. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "She will not be my servant," he stated, his eyes boring into the miner until the man physically recoiled. He then turned his gaze back to Eliza, a gaze that held the weight of the mountains behind him. "She can wear what she wants with me." The silence that fell over the main street of Redemption Gulch was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, broken only by the buzzing of flies and the distant clang of a hammer from the blacksmith's forge. Jedediah Thorne stared at the pouch of gold, his greed warring with his shock and a deep, instinctual fear of the man standing before him. The people in the crowd were frozen, their faces a mixture of awe, suspicion, and outrage. A white woman, even a troublesome one, being bought by an Apache was a violation of the unwritten laws that govern their harsh world. Eliza's own mind was a whirlwind. $1,000. It was a fortune. Enough to get Thomas to a real doctor in Tucson or even California. Enough to start a new life. But it came from a complete stranger, a man from a world she had been taught to fear. She looked from the gold on the dusty planks to the warrior's impassive face. Who was he? What did he truly want? Thorne, ever the opportunist, was the first to recover. His fear was quickly being shouldered aside by the sheer, intoxicating weight of the gold. He licked his lips and stooped, grunting with the effort to snatch the pouch. He loosened the drawstring and peered inside. His eyes widened. It was all there. Eagles and double eagles, shining and pure. The the contract is yours, Thorne stammered, his voice thick with avarice. He wouldn't meet the warrior's eyes. 1 year's indenture, paid in full. The warrior gave a curt, dismissive nod. His entire focus was now on Eliza. He took another step forward, stopping at the edge of the porch, looking up at her. He was closer now, and she could see the faint, silvery trace of an old scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a testament to a life of conflict she could barely comprehend. "Come down," he said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. Eliza hesitated. Her feet felt rooted to the wood. To step off this porch was to step into an unknown far more terrifying than a year of labor for a brute like Peterson. At least that was a devil she knew. This man was a mystery wrapped in power and shadow. He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of fear. A subtle shift occurred in his expression, a slight softening of his stoic mask. "You are not my prisoner," he said, his voice lower, meant for her alone. "Jedediah Thorne sold a contract for your labor. I have purchased it. You will work for me to honor it, that is all." Work for him? Doing what? Where? The questions swirled in her head, but she couldn't voice them. The stares of the townspeople were like physical blows. In their eyes, she was now the property of a savage. Gathering the tattered remnants of her dignity, she took a deep breath. Whatever lay ahead could not be worse than the slow death of spirit she was suffering here. She took one last look at the hostile faces in the crowd, then met the warrior's steady gaze. She nodded once, a sharp, defiant gesture. She walked to the edge of the porch and, ignoring Thorne completely, stepped down into the dust. She stood before her rescuer, her back straight, her hands clenched into fists. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. "My brother," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Thomas, he is sick. I cannot leave without him." The warrior's expression didn't change, but he gave a single assenting nod. "I know. The boy with the lung fever in the shack by the dried creek bed. He will come with us." How did he know that? The question startled her. Had he been watching her, investigating her? The thought sent a fresh chill down her spine. This was no random act of chivalry. This was a calculated move by a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Without another word, he turned and began to walk away, expecting her to follow. After a moment's hesitation, she did. The crowd parted for them again, a sea of silent, staring faces. As soon as they had passed, the whispers began, like the rustling of dry leaves. "Can't believe it. Thorne just sold her to Kyle de la Cruz." The name sent a jolt through her. Kyle de la Cruz. She had heard that name before, spoken in hushed, fearful tones around campfires. He wasn't just any Apache. He was a myth, a legend. Some said his mother was a wealthy Spanish captive, and his father a great Chiricahua chief, and that he had inherited the cunning of both. They said he owned a vast hidden ranch in the canyons, that he traded silver from secret mines, and that his herds of horses were the finest in the territory. They also said he was ruthless, a man who walked between worlds, belonging to neither, and respected by both out of fear. This was the man who now owned her contract. He led her to a pair of magnificent horses tied in the shade of the livery. One a powerful black stallion, the other a calmer chestnut mare. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she answered simply. She swung herself into the saddle, grateful for the freedom her trousers provided. The irony was not lost on her. The very garment that had condemned her was now her only practical asset. Cal mounted his stallion in a single, effortless motion. He looked back toward her shack at the miserable edge of town. "Go, get your brother," Gather only what is necessary. I will wait. As she rode toward the shack where Thomas lay weak and feverish, she glanced back. Kyle de la Cruz sat motionless on his stallion, a solitary, powerful figure silhouetted against the brutal afternoon sun. He wasn't watching her. He was watching the town, his hand resting lightly on the stock of a rifle in his saddle scabbard. He was a guardian, a predator, a king in his own domain, and she, Eliza Jane Abernathy, had just become a subject in his kingdom. She had been saved from the fire, but she had a terrifying feeling she had just landed in the heart of a volcano. The journey away from Redemption Gulch was a silent one. Eliza rode with Thomas, wrapped in their only good blanket, seated in front of her on the gentle mare. The boy was frighteningly light, his small body racked with coughing fits that seemed to shake his very bones. Cale led them not toward the established trails, but east, directly into a labyrinthine maze of canyons and rock formations. He moved with an unerring certainty, navigating the treacherous terrain as if it were a familiar room in his own home. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he drew his stallion to a halt in a small, sheltered box canyon, a hidden oasis. "We will rest here for the night," he announced, dismounting. He moved to her horse and, without asking permission, gently lifted the frail form of her brother from her arms. He carried Thomas to a soft patch of grass and laid him down as carefully as if he were handling fine porcelain. Eliza watched, a knot of conflicting emotions in her chest. His gentleness was at odds with his dangerous reputation. He built a small, smokeless fire with mesmerizing efficiency. "There is dried meat and corn cakes in my saddlebag," he said. "Feed your brother if he can eat, then yourself." Eliza did as she was told. She managed to get Thomas to swallow a few sips of water and a small piece of corn cake before he drifted back into a fitful sleep. Eliza ate, the silence stretching between them. Finally, she couldn't bear it any longer. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it?" $1,000 is a fortune. Cale looked up from the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "Cattle die. Land can be stolen. A town like yours is built on greed and will eventually eat itself. None of those things are a good investment." "And I am?" The question was sharp, tinged with sarcasm. "I did not buy you, Eliza Jane Abernathy," he corrected her, his tone even. "I bought your contract. There is a difference. I saw a woman being punished for her strength, not her weakness. Thorn and men like him fear that. They seek to crush it because they cannot possess it. I do not fear it. I respect it." His words stunned her. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you work from sunup to sundown to care for your brother. I know you face down men like Thorn without flinching. I know you chose practicality over convention, even when it made you an outcast. In the land where I was raised, these are virtues. In your world, it seems they are crimes for a woman to possess." He paused, poking the fire. "As for the money, let us just say I have a grievance with men who believe they can put a price on a person's spirit." Before she could ask more, he rose. "Get some sleep." He took a blanket from his own bedroll and laid it over Thomas, before walking to the edge of the canyon to stand watch, a solitary figure against the star-dusted sky. They rode for another full day, deeper into the rugged country. Just as Eliza began to believe they would wander the wilderness forever, the narrow canyon they were following opened into a wide, verdant valley she never would have believed existed. A clear river snaked through it, herds of healthy horses grazed on lush grass, and in the distance, nestled against a sheer cliff face, was a sprawling ranch house of adobe and dark, sturdy wood. It was a fortress and a home, all in one. This was Kyle de la Cruz's kingdom. As they approached, several Apache men emerged. One older man with a kind, weathered face, whom Kyle called Chato, came forward. "The boy is sick," Kyle said to him in a low voice. Chato nodded, his gaze falling on Thomas. He looked at Eliza with eyes that held a deep, ancient wisdom. "We will take him to the east room. My wife, Nalin, is skilled with herbs." Two men carefully carried Thomas inside. Eliza started to follow, but Cale placed a hand gently on her arm. "Let them work. Nalin knows the old ways. She can help him more than the whiskey doctor in town ever could." He then led her to a smaller separate cabin. It was simple but impeccably clean. A clean cotton dress and a pair of soft leather moccasins were laid out on the bed. "This will be your home," he said from the doorway. "You are not a prisoner here. Your work to satisfy the terms of the contract will be to assist Nalan in caring for your brother. When he is well, we will discuss a new arrangement." He turned to leave. "Kyle," she called out. He turned back. "Thank you." He simply nodded. "Rest, Eliza Jane." And then he was gone. She looked out the window at the impossibly beautiful valley. She had been freed from one cage, only to be placed in another. A much larger, more comfortable one, but a cage nonetheless, built by a man whose true motives remained a dangerous, compelling mystery. The days that followed blurred into a routine of cautious hope. Eliza spent her time in the East Room with Nalan, a small, serene woman with hands that were never still. She brewed teas from willow bark and created poultices of plants Eliza had never seen. They developed their own silent language of gestures and shared glances. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Thomas began to improve. The deep, rattling cough softened. His fever seemed to lessen its grip. A fragile seed of hope began to take root in Eliza's weary heart. Kyle kept his distance. She would see him in the evenings, a powerful, solitary figure standing on the veranda of the main house. He was a paradox, a warrior who read from leather-bound books, a man of the earth who managed complex irrigation systems with the acumen of a seasoned businessman. One evening, as Eliza sat by her brother's bedside, Nelaine entered the room, her face unusually grim. She held a small clay bowl containing the dregs of the medicine that Dr. Finch had prescribed, the same medicine Thorne had paid for. Eliza had brought the last bottle with them. Nalan beckoned her closer, pointing to the residue in the bowl. She made a gesture, a flower drooping, a person falling into a deep sleep. She crumbled a leaf from a plant known to the Apache as the dream ender, a potent sedative, a slow poison. Eliza's blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Thomas wasn't just sick with lung fever, he was being poisoned. The watered-down laudanum from Dr. Finch, the medicine Jedediah Thorne had so graciously covered, wasn't meant to cure him. It was meant to kill him slowly, quietly, to break Eliza's spirit completely, to indebt her to Thorne forever. It was a level of cruelty she could not have imagined. Every dollar she had earned, every ounce of strength she had expended, had gone toward buying the very thing that was destroying her brother. Later that evening, Cal appeared in the doorway. He held 2 cups of steaming tea. He wordlessly handed one to her and took a seat across the room. "Nalan told me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She believes the poison has not yet done permanent damage. She can brew a tea to counter it, to cleanse his body. He will recover." Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. It wasn't just relief, it was rage, a white-hot fury at Thorne, at Finch, at the whole rotten town. I, I don't know how to repay you." "Your brother's health is not part of your contract," he replied, his gaze fixed on the sleeping boy. "It is a simple matter of decency, a concept Thorne and his kind have forgotten." They sat in silence for a time, the protective walls Eliza had built around herself beginning to crumble. This man had not just saved her from servitude, he was saving her brother's life from a hidden, monstrous evil. "The name," she began, her voice tentative. "Kyle de la Cruz. It's not an Apache name." He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "My father was a Chiricahua war chief. My mother was born to a wealthy family in Sonora. She was taken in a raid when she was a girl, not much older than you are now." He spoke of it as a simple fact. "She learned the ways of my father's people. She became his wife, his advisor. She was fierce and intelligent. She taught me her language, her numbers, her books. My father taught me the ways of the land. De la Cruz was her name. I use it when I deal with your world." A faint, ironic smile touched his lips. "What happened to her?" Eliza asked softly. The smile vanished. He turned his head, and the lamplight caught the scar on his face. "When I was a boy, a patrol of irregulars, bounty hunters, tracked our band. They were not looking for warriors. They were looking for captives to sell. They attacked our winter camp when my father was away." His voice became flat, devoid of all emotion. My mother fought to protect me. She was as brave as any warrior I have ever known. He paused, and the silence in the room was heavy with unspoken pain. One of the men who led the attack, he was a young man then, greedy and cruel. He was the one who gave me this. Kyle touched his scar. It is the last gift she ever gave me, a reminder. A reminder of what? Eliza whispered. That there are two kinds of laws, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers. The laws men write in books to serve their own interests, and the laws of survival and honor that are written on the heart. I trust only the second. He took a breath. For 20 years I have looked for that man. I learned he had grown fat and prosperous, the owner of a saloon in a town built on greed. His name was Jedediah Thorne. The world tilted on its axis. Eliza stared at him, speechless. This wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a random act of compassion. It was a vendetta, decades in the making. He hadn't just been watching her in Redemption Gulch. He had been watching Thorne, waiting for the right moment, the right leverage to destroy him. Her defiance, her auction, her trousers, they weren't the cause of this. They were the key. He had used her public humiliation as the perfect stage to begin his revenge. In that moment, she understood. He had seen a reflection of his mother's spirit in her, the same refusal to be broken. But it was more than that. He had seen an opportunity for justice, a new, deeper connection formed between them in the quiet of that sick room. A bond forged not just in shared pain, but in a shared enemy. But peace in the valley was a fragile thing. A few days later, Chateau returned from a rare trading trip, his face grim. There is trouble, Cale said to Eliza that evening. Jedediah Thorne is not a man who forgives a public humiliation. He is telling people I abducted you. He has gone to the territorial marshal in Prescott. He has twisted the story, painted himself as the victim and me as the villain. But why? She cried. He has his money. It was never about the money, Eliza, Kyle said, his voice low and intense. It was about power, and now it is about his survival. He knows who I am. He must have recognized me. He knows I will not stop until he has paid for what he did. He is using your law, the white man's law, to try and destroy me before I can destroy him. He looked out at the peaceful valley, his sanctuary. He is starting a storm, Cale said softly, and he is going to aim it right at the heart of this canyon. The fragile peace was over. The world they had escaped was now coming for them. The idyllic peace of the valley was shattered. A quiet tension settled over the ranch. Kyle's men became more vigilant, their eyes constantly scanning the high ridges that rimmed their hidden world. Riders were posted as lookouts at the secret entrance to the canyon, their silhouettes dark and watchful against the sky. The sanctuary now felt like a fortress under siege. Eliza poured her anxiety into caring for Thomas. With Nalen's antidote herbs and nourishing broths, he was making a miraculous recovery. The color returned to his cheeks, his appetite grew, and for the first time in nearly a year, Eliza heard him laugh. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Each day, the unspoken bond between Eliza and Kyle deepened. He would bring her a particularly beautiful wildflower or leave a book of poetry on her doorstep. She, in turn, found herself watching for his return in the evenings, her heart giving a small, unfamiliar leap when she saw his powerful form riding across the valley floor. They were two survivors from different worlds who had found a common ground in this hidden place. The inevitable arrived on a hot, still afternoon. A single lookout galloped into the ranch yard, his horse lathered in sweat. He spoke urgently to Cale. Cale's face became a mask of stone. He turned to Eliza, who was on the porch of her cabin, her heart suddenly pounding. "Sheriff Brody is here," he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "He has a posse of 10 men with him. Thorne is with them." Sheriff Brody. Eliza knew the name. A hard but generally fair man, a former Texas Ranger. He was not a man easily swayed by gossip, which meant Thorne must have woven a very convincing web of lies. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Chateau and my men are already in position in the rocks above the trail," Kyle explained. "A single foolish move from the posse would be their last. But I do not want bloodshed. It would only bring the army. I will speak with him." He strode toward his stallion. "Stay in your cabin, Eliza. You and the boy. Do not come out no matter what you hear." "No," she said, surprising herself with the force of her own voice. She stepped off the porch. "Thorne's lies are about me, but his crimes are against both of us. I will not hide while you face him. I am not a prize to be fought over. I am a witness." Kel looked down at her, a flicker of protest in his eyes, but then he saw the iron resolve in her face. It was the same fire he had seen on the auction block. To deny her this would be to deny the very spirit he had sought to protect. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. "Nalene is with the boy. I will stand with you." Together they rode toward the mouth of the canyon. As they neared the narrow entrance, they saw them. Sheriff Brody sat on his horse, a tall, gray-haired man with a weary face. Behind him were 10 deputized men from Redemption Gulch, their faces a mixture of grim determination and nervousness. And near the front, looking smug and triumphant, was Jedediah Thorne. When Thorne saw Eliza riding beside Cale, alive and unharmed, his face contorted. "There she is, Sheriff," Thorne bellowed. "You see, the savage has her. She's probably bewitched." Sheriff Brody ignored him, his gaze fixed on Kyle, acknowledging the unseen threat he knew must be lurking in the rocks. "Kyle de la Cruz," Brody said, his voice steady. "I have a warrant sworn before a territorial judge. A complaint has been filed by Mr. Thorne. He claims you abducted this woman, Eliza Abernathy, by threat and force." "And yet," Cal replied, his voice calm, "she rides here with me of her own free will. Does she look like a captive to you, Sheriff?" Brody's eyes shifted to Eliza. "Ma'am, are you here against your will? You can speak freely. The law is here to protect you." This was her moment. The fate of this valley, of Cale, of her own future, rested on her next words. She urged her horse forward. "Sheriff Brody," she began, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Eliza Jane Abernathy. I am here of my own free will. The only man who has ever used threat and force against me is standing right behind you." She pointed a resolute finger at Thorne. Thorne's face turned a mottled shade of purple. "She's lying. He's forced her to say this." "I am not lying," Eliza continued, her voice rising. "Mr. Thorne put my services up for public auction because I refused to stop wearing trousers. He shamed me in front of the entire town. Cal de la Cruz did not abduct me. He paid $1,000 in gold to purchase my indenture contract from Mr. Thorne, an act every man in that crowd witnessed." The sheriff looked from Eliza's earnest face to Thorne's sputtering rage. $1,000? Brody asked, his eyes narrowing on Thorne. "You told me he paid you 70 and then snatched her." "The rest was a threat, a payment to keep me silent," Thorne blustered. "He's the liar, Sheriff," Eliza declared. "But that is the least of his crimes." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out the small, corked bottle of Dr. Finch's medicine. "This isn't laudanum for a cough. It's poison. Jedediah Thorne conspired with Dr. Finch to murder my brother, a 10-year-old boy, to keep me in his debt and under his control." A shocked murmur went through the posse. Thorne went pale. "That's a monstrous accusation. She's insane." "Is she?" Cale's voice cut in, cold and sharp. He looked directly at Thorne, his eyes burning with a hatred 20 years old. "Just as it was a monstrous accusation when a Chiricahua woman accused you of leading a raid on her camp, before you cut her down?" Thorne's face crumpled. The recognition was absolute. The fear in his eyes was no longer of a rival, but of a ghost from his past returned to collect a blood debt. "She's telling the truth, Sheriff." A voice came from the back of the posse, a lanky cowhand named Billy. "I was there. I saw the whole thing at the auction. He sold her fair and square." "That's enough, Thorne," Sheriff Brody said, his voice like cracking ice. His gaze shifted back to Cale, a new grudging respect in his eyes. He had been played for a fool. "It seems this warrant is based on a foundation of lies." But Thorne, cornered and exposed, was not finished. His face was a mask of pure hatred. His hand, shaking with rage, darted toward the pistol at his belt. "If the law won't deal with a savage, I will." He never had the chance. Before his fingers could even grasp the handle of his gun, an arrow seemingly from nowhere whistled through the air and embedded itself deep into the wooden pommel of his saddle, inches from his hand. The fletching quivered violently. Thorne screamed, yanking his hand back. The men in the posse looked around in terror at the silent, empty rocks above them. They were surrounded, hopelessly outmaneuvered. Cale hadn't moved a muscle. He simply looked at Sheriff Brody. As I said, she is here of her own free will, but Jedediah Thorne is a murderer. Your business here is concluded, Sheriff, but my business with him is not. You can take him back to stand trial for poisoning a child, or you can leave him here, and we will dispense our own justice for a crime he committed 20 years ago. Sheriff Brody stared at the arrow, then at Cale's unyielding face, and finally at Thorne, who was pale and trembling. He had seen enough. The law of the territory had just collided with the law of the canyon, and the canyon had won. Sheriff Brody was a pragmatic man. He understood power, and he understood when he was outmatched. The arrow was a statement of absolute control. "Disarm him," Brody ordered, jerking his chin at two of his men. They moved quickly, pulling Thorne's pistol from its holster. The saloon owner offered no resistance, the fight completely drained out of him. "Thorne, you're under arrest," Brody declared, his voice ringing with disgust, "for perjury, conspiracy to commit murder, and for wasting the time of this office. You've made a fool of me, and I don't take kindly to that. But, but he's an Indian," Thorne whimpered, his last pathetic attempt to appeal to prejudice. "You're taking his word over mine?" "No," Brody said, his voice cold. "I'm taking the word of Miss Abernathy, and the evidence of this arrow, which tells me that Cayel de la Cruz has more honor and restraint than you've got in your entire greedy carcass. We're leaving." The posse turned, eager to leave the oppressive silence of the canyon. They herded a whimpering Jedediah Thorne before them, his grand scheme of revenge having crumbled into his own personal ruin. Eliza watched them go, a profound sense of relief washing over her. She looked at Cale, who had remained watchful and still. The tension slowly eased from his shoulders as the last of the riders disappeared. "It's over," she whispered. "For now," he corrected. "Men like Thorne have long memories, but his power is broken." They rode back to the ranch house in a thoughtful silence. The entire valley seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The lookouts returned from their hidden perches, their grim faces relaxing. They looked at Eliza with a newfound respect. She had not been a victim. She had been a warrior, fighting with truth as her weapon. That evening, a celebratory feast was held. The long tables were laden with roasted venison and fresh bread. The mood was joyous. Cale's people, who had been reserved, now included her in their conversations, smiling at her. She sat beside Kyle, the emotional exhaustion of the day finally setting in. Thomas, fully recovered, was chattering happily with Chateau, who was showing him how to carve a small wooden horse. The sight brought a fresh wave of tears to Eliza's eyes. Kyle noticed. "You are not celebrating," he observed quietly. "I am," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's just, for so long, all I've had is fear. Fear for Thomas. Fear of being alone. Fear of men like Thorne. I don't know how to live without it." "You learn," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You replace it with other things. Hope. Peace. You build a life so strong that fear can find no cracks to get in." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "The contract is null. My purchase of it was to free you, not to bind you, and to bring Thorne to justice. You are free to leave whenever you wish. I can give you enough money to travel to California, to start a new life." His offer was everything she had once dreamed of. A new start, complete freedom, safety for Thomas. But the thought of leaving this valley, of leaving him, sent a pang of desolation through her that was sharper than any fear she had ever known. She looked around the warm, bustling room, at the kind faces of Nalan and Chateau, at her healthy, smiling brother. She looked at the powerful, complex man beside her, the man who had orchestrated a decades-long plan for justice, and seen in her a kindred spirit of defiance. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle's stoic mask finally broke. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. "Then this is your home, Eliza Jane," he said. "Your work is no longer to fulfill a contract. Your work, if you choose to accept it, is to build a life here with us, with me." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm and strong, a silent promise of everything to come. It was not the touch of an owner or a master, but of a partner, an equal. A new truth settled in Eliza's soul. She had come to the West seeking survival, but she had found something far more profound. She had found a place where a woman in trousers was not a Jezebel, but a person of strength. She had found a home, not on a map, but in the heart of a hidden valley, and in the soul of a man who lived by a law, written not in books, but on the heart. The reckoning of lies had ended, and the time for truth, the truth of a shared life, was just beginning. The seasons turned in the valley. Word eventually trickled back that Jedediah Thorne, convicted of conspiracy and facing the gallows, had taken his own life in his cell. The threat was gone for good. The legend of the woman in trousers and the Apache who bought her freedom began to soften even the hard prejudices of Redemption Gulch. Eliza's life transformed. She was no longer a guest but part of the valley's heartbeat. Thomas thrived, his past sickness a distant memory. The bond between Eliza and Cale, forged in crisis and a quest for vengeance, blossomed in the peace that followed. They became true partners. He shared with her the secrets of his world, and she, with her sharp mind, brought a new order to his trade records. Their evenings were spent in easy conversation on the veranda, two outcasts who had found a common language. One crisp autumn evening, as they stood on a bluff overlooking the moonlit valley, Cale turned to her. "This is your home, Eliza," he said, "but I want you to be my partner in more than just work. I want to build a life with you." It was not a flowery proposal, but a declaration between equals. Tears of joy filled her eyes. She thought of the woman on the auction block, shame for her defiance. Now she was being loved for it. "Yes, Cale," she whispered. "Yes." He pulled her into his arms, and she knew the last vestiges of fear were gone forever. She was home. Their life together became the new legend of the valley, a bridge between two cultures. Eliza never stopped wearing her trousers. They were no longer a symbol of rebellion, but of her identity, the mark of a woman who had faced down a hateful world and carved out a horizon of her own making. Beside the man who knew her spirit was never meant to be tamed. The story of Eliza Jane and Cale de la Cruz is more than just a tale of the Wild West. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about conforming, but about having the courage to defy. It's about how justice can be found in the most unexpected ways, and how true partnerships are built on mutual respect and the recognition of a kindred spirit. What do you think was more powerful, Eliza's defiance or Cale's quest for revenge? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of courage and justice moved you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a great story. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of the unexpected.